Last week on Hardfire,
I'm not sure that the people that I've been dealing with are jihadists, and I don't know that they're the enemy. I would say that they are more of our allies than our own government is. And I think that they did us a favor on September 11th, but it's one that we declined to accept.
and coming up,
I can't simply let go of your comment that the 9/11 attackers did us a favor.
Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die.
Welcome to Hardfire. I'm Ronald WIECK. My guest tonight, as last week, is Scott FENSTERMAKER, an attorney for 2 or perhaps 3 of the Guantanamo detainees. This is part 2 of a 2-part Hardfire edition. We're going to continue where we left off last week.
I'm not sure that the people that I've been dealing with are jihadists, and I don't know that they're the enemy. I would say that they are more of our allies than our own government is. And I think that they did us a favor on September 11th, but it's one that we declined to accept.
See, that's something that's hard for me to understand. They did us a favor. Now, obviously, there are people who are going to be jumping up saying, well, they killed 3,000 innocent people. What kind of favor is that?
They didn't kill 300,000, they didn't kill 3 million, and they didn't kill 30 million.
Could they have? I mean,
I don't know.
Give them a nuclear warhead, and I think they'd be willing to try again.
I'm not sure that that's the case, but it's possible that they would. I don't know.
I mean, Osama bin Laden talks about the occupation of the sacred sites, you know, Mecca and Medina and whatnot. Granted, he has his own problems with the Saudi ruling family, but surely he must understand that we were invited by the Saudis to send in troops. And they did so through their fear, their understandable fear of Saddam Hussein. I mean, we're not in Saudi Arabia because it's a place we particularly wanted to be. And when we were asked to leave, we left.
Well, we invaded Yemen last week, and that's the same story we used to cover for that invasion as well. And I think that was just as nonsensical as our excuse for being in Saudi Arabia.
I can't simply let go of your comment that the 9/11 attackers did us a favor. Well, 3,000 people is a terrible toll. It's a lot less than 300,000 or 3 million. Certainly, the attackers on 9/11 were not trying to limit the damage they did. They did as much damage as they could with the weapons at their disposal. If they had biological or chemical or certainly nuclear weapons, they would have killed many more people.
And you assume that they didn't have the weaponry to kill more of us. I'm not sure that that's accurate. All they would have had to do is hijack 8 planes or 80 planes or whatever they would have needed. But I think that we as Americans view the September 11th attacks as a terrible calamity only because we've never seen anything else. What happened that day was relatively minor and insignificant in the overall scheme of things. And I'm not saying that to diminish the loss of those who lost loved ones that day. As I've said, I was devastated when that happened, but at the end of the day, it was a minor attack.
What are your feelings about the state of Israel? Do you regard it as a democracy? Do you think its existence is still open to debate?
Well, I personally don't know anything about Israel. I've never been there, and I don't have much experience in that area. I'm not a foreign policy expert. I'm a lawyer, but it does appear as though there are some people throughout the world who are dissatisfied with Israel, and it's created some friction at times.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you from my experiences with the 9/11 Truth movement that many members of the 9/11 Truth movement, not all, I'm not saying that all of them are, but many of them are just Jew haters. There's no better way of describing it.
Right.
You know, anti-Semitic is a kind of highfalutin term. They don't like Jews.
Right.
And saying that, well, I'm opposed to Zionism is kind of a sanitized way of expressing their real feelings. But they are old-line Jew haters.
Well, I'm only here on behalf of my clients, and none of the clients that I've ever corresponded with or met have ever articulated any of the concerns that you just articulated. So it's hard for me to say and whether or not how we should deal with people like that, because I don't have any personal experience with anybody like that.
Well, are you curious though? I mean, would you ask your clients how they view the United States in relation to their world?
Only to the extent that it would impinge upon their defense at their trial.
Well, let's get back to their defense. Again, you took pains to distinguish what they did from acts of murder. So if they're not acts of murder, then they must be acts of war. I mean,
No, not necessarily. It's an act of self-defense.
But it was an unprovoked attack. I mean, what were they defending against?
You perceive it to be an unprovoked attack. They don't.
Well, we have the Khobar Towers. We have the attacks on the embassies in Africa. We have the bombing of the barracks in Beirut. We have the USS Cole. I mean, I see a lot on one side of the ledger. I see American interests continually under attack. I don't see the other side. What am I missing?
Well, of the various incidents that you just related, when was the first of those incidents? When did it occur?
Well, I mean, if you could consider, I suppose, the assassination attempt on George Bush Sr. Was that 1993? Okay, that's Saddam Hussein's agents acting in response to the first Gulf War. But so what? The Khobar Towers was 1996. You know,
Okay, so when was the State of Israel created?
1948.
Okay, and when did the United States start supporting Israel?
I guess that really, I guess we can associate that more with the 60s. Decade of the 50s, certainly Eisenhower disappointed Israel in the Suez Crisis. I don't think that the perception was that America was tilting heavily towards Israel. Certainly Israel relied largely on France for its fighter jets. Probably around the time of the Six-Day War, 1967, that seemed to link the United States to Israel in the minds of many people.
Was it before or after the war that we started to support them?
Again, it's hard to fix a definite date to that, but I would say the perception that the United States was close to Israel really doesn't go back further than the mid to late 60s.
Okay, that seems to be before 1993.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so when you say that their attacks were unprovoked, I'm not sure that the perception of that would be accurate in the Middle East.
But bin Laden doesn't really talk much about Israel, except to call her the little Satan. I mean, bin Laden declared war on America in 1996. He reiterated the declaration in 1998. But apparently what stuck in his craw was the presence of U.S. forces in the holy sites in Saudi Arabia.
According to who?
According to bin Laden.
Have you spoken to him?
No, but this is what he said on the videos he's released.
Okay.
For example, in 2006, Bush and Cheney are looking at the polls, and they say, we're headed for a disaster. You know, we're going to be swept out of both houses of Congress and stripped of all our power. Our second term is a joke here. This would be a good time to play a bin Laden card if one existed. Now, the fact that they didn't play it means they didn't have it.
Oh, they absolutely did.
In 2006?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what got my entire involvement in Guantanamo Bay rolling. Yeah. It was the day after Labor Day, President Bush had a press conference at the White House where he announced he was bringing 14 of Osama bin Laden's followers from the secret CIA prison system to Guantanamo Bay to face prosecution by military commission. That was their card.
Yeah, but that didn't get him anything. I mean, to play the bin Laden card, you would, for example, say, hey, we got him, we killed him.
The United States government, the last thing that it ever wants is to get Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden is our Emmanuel Goldstein.
But Bush and Cheney suffered a disaster in 2006.
All you're saying is that it didn't work.
They didn't try anything.
Yes, they did. I just told you what they tried.
Oh, but that would have no electoral impact.
Well, it was intended to.
No.
It was intended to.
After 2004, I mean, in the closing days of the campaign, bin Laden surfaces, makes a video where he thumbs his nose at America, and everyone argues, well, who does this help? Does it help Kerry? Does it help Bush? I mean, the polls showed it was a wash. Didn't mean anything one way or the other. But, you know, in terms of trying to say someone set this up, no, nobody plans that badly. You know, when people do things, they do them to derive a benefit. Now, obviously, if bin Laden shows that he's still out there and he's still defiant, it's not going to help Bush. You know, I'm not paranoid enough to think that Kerry had anything to do with the video. He didn't. But neither did Bush. I mean, it was simply bin Laden being bin Laden.
Perhaps.
And, you know, obviously, there's no gain for Bush in continuing to be defied by the man you've identified as your target. If you say, he's my target, and he comes out and says, yes, but you can't get me, you can't gain anything from that.
There's an absolute benefit in it. You're only looking at it from the perspective of an intelligent and educated person. From the perspective of the American public, it's a tremendous benefit. Just like the reason.
But he didn't gain any votes.
That all you're saying is that it didn't work.
But again, I can't imagine that anyone would plan. See, this takes us back to the 9/11 truth movement. They keep talking about this gigantic imaginary conspiracy that orchestrated these attacks, and then you ask them, what's the punchline? I mean, this is like a Shaggy Dog story that just staggers on and on in search of a punchline. We did this in order to what? And they'll talk about, well, build a natural gas pipeline in Afghanistan. Nobody's building a natural gas pipeline in Afghanistan. Nobody can.
But you're assuming that this is being done for the benefit of America as opposed to the benefit of Americans.
What's that distinction that you're making?
Well, our government is not coextensive with our country. And the people who have the power to manipulate the government are not coextensive with the people. And that's wherein the problem lies.
Even if we grant that, though, this class, this conspiratorial class, they have to benefit in some way.
Sure, they're making a lot of money out of it.
Well, who? I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, in the run-up to the Iraq War, the oil companies certainly wanted Bush, you know, to stop this talk about invasion. You know, why don't you just cut a deal with Saddam? I mean, Saddam would be delighted to do this, and we'd all make some money. And Bush basically, you know, stubbornly refused. He's, no, I'm going to topple him. And that's not what the oil companies wanted to hear. I mean, right now, we were getting about 3.8, 4% of our oil from Iraq prior to the invasion. That hasn't gone up. You know, we didn't invade Iraq for oil.
Well, you're assuming that it all has to do with oil. How about defense contractors? What has been their bottom line
You know
impact?
what? In 1944, Harry Truman inveighed against war profiteers, he called them. Sure, there were unscrupulous people who were making a fortune on World War II. That doesn't mean World War II wasn't worth fighting. I mean, would you?
This isn't World War II.
Would you agree World War II was the good war? I mean, you know.
I think that there were positive aspects to it, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there was.
Yeah, Germany had to be stopped, that's for sure.
Okay, I mean, we can certainly agree on that. Incidentally, in 1942, as I'm sure you know, 8 German saboteurs landed, 4 of them right here in Amagansett, and 4 others in, I think it's called Ponte Vedra in Florida. They landed to wreak havoc in various American industries. They were going to set explosives. They had all training in explosives. What I find interesting about this caper is that when they left their submarines, they were wearing uniforms because they didn't want to be apprehended on the beach in uniform. They understood the implications of being out of uniform and landing on an American beach. Now, they ditched the uniforms, and, you know, then 2 of them turned in the whole operation to the FBI.
Right.
But that's a fairly famous Supreme Court case, ex parte Quirin.
Right.
What do you think about that? Roosevelt put them before military tribunals, and 6 of them were electrocuted, not shot. I thought they were shot, but 6 of them were electrocuted. Roosevelt apparently had some second thoughts because he asked the Supreme Court to review it. But do you think that should have gone to an American criminal court, or was that appropriately decided by a military tribunal?
Well, it's hard to say. I'm not familiar with all the facts that President Roosevelt was familiar with, but it does seem that I think prosecuting military personnel before military commissions is not as much of a problem as it is prosecuting civilians before it.
A couple of the Germans were actually American citizens. All of them had lived in America in the 20s and 30s. Two of them were actually American citizens.
Right.
But see, that's the thing that I think a lot of people are curious about, because the right is hammering Holder and, by extension, Obama for shifting this to the criminal court system. You know, this whole leftist idea that terrorism is a criminal matter. It's not an affair of state.
Right.
The right has a problem with that. So do I. I mean, it seems to me that these people think of themselves as combatants. Let's take them at their word. So, are you comfortable with trying this in a court of law?
Well, I don't think they should be tried at all, but that's a different issue than what you're asking about. And I think one of the things that you have to understand is that while a lot of what I've talked about tonight, I've mentioned that I don't really know much about, I do know a lot about the military commissions, and they are a sham, they are a farce, and they are a stain on America, and they will be forever.
Now, why do you say that?
Because the way that they're being operated is a joke. The people who are involved in operating the military commissions at Guantanamo Bay are war criminals, and I hope that they one day are prosecuted, convicted, and face the death penalty, because they deserve it. I mean, they are really bad. I mean, the defense attorneys. I mean, for instance, one of the first man that was brought from Guantanamo to New York, Mr. Galani, who was my client when he was brought to New York, he is now giving his attorneys, civilian attorneys in New York, a hard time. And the fact they brought this to the judge's attention, and I think, reading between the lines, they're actually afraid for their safety. It's understandable. I mean, any of the defense attorneys who have been involved in Guantanamo Bay, and any of the defense attorneys that will be involved in this case in New York, their lives will be in danger, and justifiably so. Any defendant who has to deal with one of these defense attorneys has every right to kill him, and to do it in as brutal and as vicious a way as possible. And, you know,
so you're saying that the military defense attorneys are more or less they're on the take. I mean,
and the civilian ones too.
Yeah.
Civilian. I'm not talking about just the military. In many ways, the civilian ones have been worse. I mean, before we began taping, we talked about the ACLU. The ACLU is just unbelievable what they've done at Guantanamo Bay. They are hated by the detainees, and what they have done is nothing short of criminal.
Well, now, this is going to raise a lot of eyebrows. The ACLU is a favorite demon of the right. I mean, certainly the ACLU finds all sorts of, in my opinion, non-existent rights for terrorists. And yet you're saying that they...
Well, with respect to the ACLU's performance at Guantanamo Bay, they would be a very easy target for the right, and the right should immediately demand a full accounting. And when I say accounting, financial accounting of the ACLU's involvement at Guantanamo Bay. It would be fodder to destroy that organization and emasculate it. And if the right wants to attack the ACLU, they should investigate what they've done at Guantanamo Bay.
I have no problem with emasculating the ACLU, but again, this notion of the military lawyers as war criminals, you keep giving us the impression...
calling them war criminals would be too kind.
But
it's an insult to war criminals.
You're suggesting that the people who are in Guantanamo don't belong there. They shouldn't be there.
I'm not suggesting that at all. What I'm saying is that the attorneys who are involved in their defense, their performance has been criminal.
But what about the prosecutors?
I don't know. I've never dealt with a prosecutor.
Oh, okay.
I've never dealt with a prosecutor.
So in other words, you just don't
I've never been permitted to deal with a prosecutor.
You don't think they're getting an honest representation, in other words?
That would be grossly... excessively too kind.
Okay, but then that raises the question of your own goals. You have a client who's telling you he was involved in 9/11.
Right.
But you'd like to get him off.
I didn't say that.
Well...
I mean, I said I want to help present his defense. Actually, I'm not going to participate in the trial, and I think I've said that quite clearly. Everybody knows, I mean, that's quite well known that I'm not going to participate in the trial.
But you said something about if they were somehow acquitted, however unlikely that may be, you would celebrate?
Sure, they have a defense. I mean, that's their defense. I mean, that's what our role is. That's what our role is. My role is to present their defense. If they get off, then that's so be it. I don't think there's any chance of that happening, but...
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. As a practical matter, well...
It's not a defense it's going to sell in the United States. It's a defense that's going to sell quite well overseas.
Yeah, now that you did say something on O'Reilly about American propaganda. I'm not sure what propaganda you're referring to.
The misinformation that the American public is getting about what's going on.
Well, be a little more specific.
Well, the only misinformation that I'm personally aware of has to do with the military commissions and to a certain extent the habeas cases at Guantanamo. But if my experience in that realm is indicative of how the United States is acting in other realms related to the war on terror, then I would not believe anything that they say.
Just to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, when you're criticizing so vehemently these military commissions, you are talking about the Defense Council.
Yes, and certain of the procedures of the clerk's office as well, but primarily the Defense Council.
Okay, again, I have to say that I prepared for this interview by working on the assumption that you were a radical leftist. And, you know, I assumed I was going to hear a litany of familiar charges about American imperialism and colonialism. And again, for the record, you simply don't subscribe to that.
Well, I'm not a leftist, that's for sure.
Well, it would be hard for a conservative to talk much about American imperialism and colonialism. I mean, you're not a Marxist, in other words. You don't see things in those terms. You're pretty committed to capitalism, and
certainly
you don't see America as irredeemably racist and. You know,
I think the human race is irredeemably racist.
Oh, well, all right. That's you know.
We happen to be part of that. I don't think we're any worse.
I have a certain sympathy for anyone who sees a lot of bad in humankind, but you are not an America hater.
I wouldn't think so, although I would think most people who have watched me in my interviews would think I am, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, that obviously you're going to strike people as someone who has an animus against America, and you don't see yourself as sympathetic to the aims of the jihadists.
Well, again, I don't know that I've ever met a jihadist, and I don't really know what they think.
Well, again, I think their aims, as I've said, it's to reestablish a caliphate, to promote a worldwide Islamic state. I mean, you know.
Yeah, I don't know the first thing about
that.
But
you don't want America to be governed by Sharia.
I'm not sure what that is, but
well, it's just, you know, Islamic law.
Okay.
You know, but that's not your idea. I mean,
no, whatever.
You're happy with the Constitution.
The problem is not the Constitution. The problem is our unwillingness to follow it.
Okay. You don't have a problem with America defending itself?
Certainly not, as long as that's what we're doing.
Yeah, but, you know, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, there were demonstrations on various campuses organized by Marxists and other hardline leftists who were seeking immediately to forestall any kind of American military response.
That may very well be the case, but I'm not familiar with that. I didn't follow it.
Okay, but you don't sympathize with it. In other words, you're not a fan of Noam Chomsky or Howard Zinn or Ward Churchill or.
I don't know the first thing about them. I've heard of Noam Chomsky, but I've never heard of the other people.
Okay, Nicholas D. Genova. Or...
No, I'm just a guy that goes to work.
Interesting. I mean, if it's a pose, it's a remarkably effective one. I mean, it's certainly.
No, other than Noam Chomsky, and I don't even know how to pronounce his name. I've never heard of him.
Because you know there will obviously be people who are prepared to brand anyone who seeks to discover rights for the terrorists as viciously anti-American. You know.
I would seek to discover rights for any human being. And the people that you've labeled terrorists are human beings.
Okay, but again, that goes, if we try to discuss a fair trial, as a lawyer, you might mean one thing, and as a layman, I might mean something else. I mean, I think that for someone as unsophisticated as I, for the public in general, a fair trial simply means let's determine guilt or innocence. You know, let's find out if the person is justly accused, or, you know, if he should be acquitted of these charges. I mean, certainly average people like myself would not see any element of fairness in getting an acquittal for someone who's manifestly guilty.
Oh, that's the ultimate fairness, if in fact that's what the evidence says should happen.
No, I'm saying manifestly guilty means he did it, but you know, you use various techniques to get him off.
Well, just because you did it doesn't mean that you're guilty. I mean, there are many defenses, and that's the whole point of this, of their defense. is they did it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're guilty. It may mean that they're innocent.
Yeah, but that's what that's again, that brings us back to a point we made earlier. They're taking pride in something that we are calling, not we, that specifically the Obama administration is calling a crime. I don't want to call it a crime. I'd call it an act of war and a war crime. But it's not something, it's not like a youthful activist slips a knife into someone's ribs to steal his wallet. I mean, that's a crime. I mean, flying commercial airliners into buildings, that's an act of war. It's, according to the Geneva Protocols, it's unlawful because you're targeting civilians. It's a war crime, but again, it shouldn't be in a criminal court.
That's your position.
Yeah, I mean, but you see why I'm not alone in holding that position.
I understand why you're not alone, that's for sure.
Yeah, but you don't agree with that.
Absolutely not. I think it's silly, frankly. And I mean, I don't mean to demean you, but it's
No.
it's frightening. It frightens me a great deal that there's actually people in our country that feel that way.
But you think that an enemy combatant should be tried as an American citizen when, in fact, he's not?
I don't think that the fact that they're not American citizens makes any difference whatsoever.
Well, I mean, if a foreign national commits a crime, he can be extradited to his country of origin and tried for that crime there, right?
Can also be tried here.
But these people don't regard themselves as criminals. They don't see themselves as murderers.
I don't necessarily see them as criminals either.
But they killed 3,000 civilians.
How many did we kill at Dresden and Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
That was a war. We were fighting World War II.
But by your own admission, so is this.
But it's a one-sided war. I mean, they declared war on us in 1996.
You believe it's a one-sided war.
Well,
We declared war on them in 1947 or 48, whatever you think.
Again, I don't think the historical record would support you on that.
Okay.
You know. Well, look, we've had a pretty far-ranging discussion. We're almost out of time. I would love to invite you back to field some calls. If we can set up a system whereby we can take some phone calls. We've done this in the past. Would you be willing to join us for that?
Sure, I'd love to. It'd be fun.
All right, so we'll try to do that. And for now, I want to thank all the viewers for indulging us. I hope you've found this discussion stimulating, if perhaps irritating. And on behalf of my guest, Scott FENSTERMAKER, I'm Ronald WIECK. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you again. Good night.